Another wonderful class of My God. And buckle up. We got lots going on tonight. We got lots going on tonight. Tonight, we're going to be moving into heavy philosophy mode. We're going to be asking big philosophical questions, what we call paradoxes. The biggest questions people have asked about God throughout the ages. For thousands of years, these have been the questions people have asked about and wondered. And we're going to be taking our shot at them, God willing. And, I have to tell you, this was a very difficult class to prepare because it's just so much and so deep and so mind-bending. So listen, God willing, we'll make our way through them in an enjoyable way, in a timely fashion, in a meaningful way. So this is what we got up on tonight's menu. 4 philosophical paradoxes that we're going to be talking about today. Question number 1, can God create a rock that he can't lift? All right, that's question number 1. Question number 2, does God's foreknowledge preclude our free choice? Question number 3, is there anything that God finds difficult to do? Question number 4, if God has decided to do something, can we change his mind? All right, that's what we got for today. Each of these questions gets us into a lot of trouble, gets us into a minefield of Jewish study, but God willing, we will succeed. So let's begin. Without further ado, question number 1, can God create a rock that he can't lift? The question is not just about a rock, but the question is about any type of feat that boggles the imagination, where there is an inherent conundrum, a paradox, which means like this. If God is all powerful, that means there's nothing he can't do. Okay? If there's nothing that he can't do, that means that he could create a rock that's too heavy for him. But then if he can't pick up that rock, then what's the problem? Then he's not all powerful anymore. Understand? So can God make himself not all powerful anymore? So that means God is not, Can God copy himself? Can God make a second God, but still be one? I don't know. So you see, there are 2 types of things about God and the types of things that God could do or can't do. There's one category is the impossible. Can God do the impossible? So you tell me, could God do the impossible? What's an example of the impossible? Splitting the Red Sea. That's the impossible. Can God do that? Yeah, it's not a very big problem. God could do the impossible. We all know that. Welcome, Doug. How you doing? Welcome on board. So God could do the impossible. That we know. The question is, could God do the unthinkable? God do the unthinkable, the thing that doesn't make any sense. For example, can God make that 2 + 2 = 5? What do you think? Can God fit an elephant into a needle hole, but without shrinking the elephant and without expanding the hole of the needle? Can God do that? Can God create a rock that he can't lift? So these are the questions that start. See, it's a little bit of a problem. Okay, so in any case, let us start taking a look into what Judaism says, what the texts have to say. So I want to share with you what we're going to be doing right now. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share with you a historical dispute about this question. And the historical dispute is between Jewish philosophers and Jewish mysticism. The mystics. So the philosophers, the mystics. From the perspective of Jewish philosophy, the answer is one thing. From the perspective of Jewish mysticism, it's something else. And then I'm going to show you how really they're not arguing. They're both right. It just depends which perspective you're looking at the issue from. And what we're going to explore right now is really going to set the basis for the rest of today's class. And not just for today's class, but a lot of what we've been speaking about in the earlier classes, which have been a little bit more philosophical. The first class and the second class, today is really where we're going to be clarifying a lot of this issue. So let's begin first with the dispute. The dispute takes us about somewhere around 1,000 years ago, a little bit less, 800 years ago. Not too long ago, right? Relatively speaking. From the perspective of Jewish philosophy, from the perspective of philosophy, simply philosophy. Philosophy is very rationalistic. A philosophy by nature is not faith-based. Faith could inform your direction, but philosophy is looking to prove things, to intellectually delve into things and prove them rationally or philosophically. From the perspective of Jewish philosophy, the answer is no. God can do the impossible. God cannot do the unthinkable. God cannot do the illogical. God cannot make 2 + 2 = 5. And the philosophers say it's okay. It's okay. There are certain axioms, there are certain truths that dictate logic. And it's okay. They're not that bothered. Jewish philosophers are really not that bothered that we could say that God is simply not capable of something. Okay, it's not capable. Now, let's take a look at this. One of the most classical, and next course, we have a full class just about Jewish philosophy. So if you want to understand the genre and the feeling and the flavor and the experience of how Jewish philosophy works and how Jewish philosophy thinks, it's like its own genre. It's very unique. We'll be doing that in next course. But let's look. One of the most classical books of Jewish philosophy is Maimonides' author. It was called The Guide for the Perplexed. Guide for the Perplexed is a very interesting book because Maimonides lived in a time where philosophy was all the rage. It was very big, Jewish philosophy. Today, like philosophy, it's not in style. It's not in vogue. I don't know what's in vogue today, but back then, philosophy was all the rage. There's other stuff. Yeah, there's other isms, but then it was literally philosophy. The philosophical way of thinking about things was very big then. And at that time, it was an issue that the Jewish community faced. That especially young Jews, they looked at philosophy, and Judaism seemed very primitive, very backwards when compared to philosophy. And a lot of Jews just really were dumping Judaism in the face of philosophy. So Maimonides did something which is quite extraordinary, being the absolute genius and Jewish leader who he was. He wrote a book which explored Judaism entirely from a philosophical point of view. Not so much from a traditionalist point of view, purely philosophical. And he called it Guide for the Perplexed because that's what he was dealing with those days. Very perplexed people, which just simply couldn't see how philosophy, which was the truth of the day, is compatible with Judaism. So a purely philosophical take on Judaism Maimonides did, and this helped an entire generation of people embrace Judaism again and become comfortable with Judaism again. So it's a good book if you want to kind of get the purely philosophical take on a Jewish issue from a Jewish perspective, which means it's Jewish philosophy, which in fact is a little bit of an oxymoron. Okay, but in any case, without getting too carried away, let's take a look at text 1. All right, our first text for tonight. Mary, would you like to start us off? Text 1, page 142 in your books.
Defining perfection. The inability to accomplish something that is beyond one's sphere does not constitute imperfection. We would not call someone weak if they were unable to lift 1,000 talents. So too, we do not consider God to be imperfect because he can't transform himself into a body.
So these are one of these conundrums. Can God literally force himself into a body and still be God? And still be the all-knowing, the all-powerful, the all-pervasive God? Maimonides says, no, he can't. There's limits to everything. Even to God, there's limits. God can't limit himself into a body. Can't do the impossible. Maimonides says it's okay. There's certain things that are beyond, that will break certain rules that we can't break, and God cannot do that. And from the perspective of Jewish philosophy, they simply say, when something becomes too unthinkable, we say that God can't do it, and they don't mind that. Jewish philosophy, from the perspective of Jewish philosophy, they have no problem limiting God in this way. Let's put that up over here. The rational philosophical response is that God can do what is impossible, but God cannot do what is the unthinkable. That is the rational response. All right. Okay, let's move on now. Now, at this time, 800 years ago to 900 years ago, the era of the development of Jewish philosophy, and this is the official Jewish philosophical take. All Jewish philosophy books make the same assertion. God can't do certain things. Come along the mystics, and the mystics come along and say, they fight back. They say, no way, no way. You're getting yourself in deep, deep trouble by even saying such words. God is incapable of doing certain things. Can't say that. Can't say that. Why can't you say that? This is what the Jewish philosophers say. Jewish philosophers say, if you are answering this question, if you take this question seriously, and you even attempt to answer the question, can God lift or make a rock that he himself can't lift? Can God make 2 + 2 = 5? If you're even asking such a question, if you're even entertaining such a question, you already got everything wrong. Already got everything wrong. And basically, the mystics' point here is, God created the laws of nature. God created the laws of logic. God made up the rules. He made these rules. He's not bound by those rules. He's not imprisoned by those rules. We are stuck in the system that God created, where there's rules and there's laws. So for us, 2 + 2 = 4. 2 + 2 will never equal 5. But you know why? Because we live in an environment where there are certain laws of logic that have already been created by God. But God made that up. So what they're saying is God is beyond anything. God is infinite. What are you even saying and asking such questions about God? So I want to explain that point a little bit more. It's a little bit of a fine point. What does that mean over here? So let's start like this. We are finite. We are all limited. God is infinite. So what does that mean? So let's do a little bit of a thought exercise, all right? So help me out over here. Here's a little bit of a thought exercise. I want you to think. I want you to visualize and picture in your mind. All right, if it will help you, then close your eyes. I want you to picture in your mind an infinite table. Infinite table. I want you to clearly visualize the image of your infinite table. You have it? We're doing good? You got your infinite table? Okay. Now I want to ask you a few questions about your table, all right? What material is your table? What's it made out of? Anybody? What do you say, Mary?
Granite.
It's granite. You got a granite table. That's it, going in style, huh? What else?
Wood.
You got what? You've got a wood table. All right, okay. I've got news for you. Your table is actually not infinite. It's granite, it's not wood. Yours is wood, it's not granite. That's finite. It's this and not that. So it can't be made out of any material. Okay, I got another question for you. What height is your table? Is it like a regular size table, like a kiddie, like a preschool table? Is it a countertop table? Like a high top? What do you say? What height do you have in your visualization in your mind? You know what I'm going to say, but it's okay. Just play along.
And you could still say it's infinite in length and width.
Oh, okay. In one little dimension. No, I'm saying an infinite table. What height is it? The answer is there can't be any height, because if it's this height and not that height, it's not infinite. So it can't have any height. It can't have any material. It can't have any actual dimensions. It can't have any width and length, or else it wouldn't be infinite. What do you have left now in your head, in your mind? Are you left with visualizing anything? You're left with nothing. See, it's a good demonstration of how totally incapable we are of relating to anything which is infinite. We don't even have any imaginative power to even fathom what infinite means. Infinite means it has no limitation, no description. A description means you could define it. It is this, it's not that. It's here, it's not there. It's made out of this. It only goes until here. It doesn't go until there. That's what makes anything anything. The moment that you strip anything of any description, what is it? It's nothing. It's everything. It's beyond thing. God is infinite. When God created a world, right? However many years ago it was, whenever God got this whole process spinning, God created the concept of something called finite or finitude. Stuff. God created the laws of nature. That's a creation. To us, it's an axiom. To us, it's simply a truth. But God simply, literally had to create a construct, a model of a universe. And so God created all these different dimensions to reality. So one dimension of reality is spatial dimension. I am standing here. I'm not standing there. That's one dimension. And there's a dimension of time. I am right now in this moment of time. I'm not in another moment of time. So I'm standing here in this moment at this moment of time. Another dimension, I don't know if it's actually considered one of the dimensions of reality, but one of the ways how we measure reality is by weight as well. Weight. What's the density of something? How solid versus fluid is it? How heavy is it? So this is heavy. But how heavy is it? Okay, it's something heavy. But that's a limitation. That's a definition. This is 25 pounds, not 50 pounds, not 200 pounds. It's this, not that. So definitions is simply only something that exists within finite creation. An infinite God has no sense of description, because you can't, the moment you give a description, that means you're limiting it. You're saying this and not that, and no limitation. So you're going to ask a question. Now, this is what the mystics say. How ludicrous is it to even ask, can God create a rock that's too heavy that he can't lift? You're out of your mind for even asking that type of question. Too heavy? You're projecting your experience onto God. God has no concept of heavy. Heavy and light is simply a limitation that we live within. It's like, let's say it's a ridiculous question. What are you even asking? I'll give you a little analogy. Just imagine that you are, maybe you actually are, I don't know. But imagine you are an animator for a Disney movie. All right, you are creating an imaginary reality on a computer screen, right? CGI, computer generated images, right? I believe that's what it stands for, right? So you create characters, you create an environment. And by the way, you can make things, you can make them, nothing weighs anything. You can make floating cities, right? You could do whatever you want if you're already making a Disney movie. I'm saying nothing is actually, you make the laws of nature for the sense of the movie. Now I want to ask you a question. Could you make something in the movie that is too heavy for you to lift? Can you create an object in the movie that is too heavy for you to lift? What would you say? The answer is not no. The answer is it's a ridiculous question. I don't live in that sphere. that is not my reality. I'm making the rules of that reality. I'm not bound by those rules. it's like, and if you're going to force me to have to answer questions as if I am bound by the rules of my movie that I'm literally making on a computer, I'm making everything up, then you really don't understand what's happening over here. You don't understand the dynamics, the power dynamics. So the mystics say, stop asking stupid questions and stop looking for stupid answers. That's basically what they say. Stop trying to understand God from your perspective. Stop projecting your limitations upon God. God is the creator. You're the created. You're the creation. So you are stuck within his version of whatever he decided creation should look like, including that there are things that are too heavy for you. Okay, does that make some sense? So the mystics are very mad at the philosophers. You kind of get why, right? Like philosophers, why are you so stuck in your own? Okay, that's what this is. Let's read text 2. Text 2 is from Rabbi Shlomo ben Aderet. Lived similar timing to the times of Maimonides. And it's, he comes and gives us the mystical perspective, even though he's actually usually known as more of a Talmudist. But in Judaism, great sages are usually the masters of many genres. And music, does it work that way as well? I don't think so, right? In music, usually you're the master of one genre. If you're rock and roll, you're probably not really doing classical philharmonic stuff, right? But in Judaism, usually once you're a sage in one, you kind of have it all. But okay, in any case, Rabbi Shlomo ben Aderet, in the yeshiva world, he's better known as the Rashba. If you study Talmud, you learn the Rashba. His name was Rabbi Shlomo ben Aderet. Yes, you want to read?
Sure.
You read text 2.
It is clear that the beliefs that we have that are rooted in our tradition and those that are sourced in our prophetic revelation cannot be falsified by logic. The truth is that no one would deny a truth that is accepted on faith unless he was of those who deny the possibility of anything that is naturally or physically impossible. Those who say that the impossible is impossible even for God, it is if they assert that nothing transcends their own logic. But the truth is that the transcendental God oversees natural law. He can and does change it on occasion, for he is the master to preserve or to change it.
Very powerful words. You got to read these words carefully, right? To think that God is bound by the same rules that you are bound by is ridiculous, he says. These are people which are not willing to admit that there's something that could transcend their own logic. Right? God oversees natural law. This is simply the way it works. This is what he's saying. So I put that up over here on the screen. The mystical response to this issue is that assuming that God is limited by rules places a great limitation on God, and God is the architect of the laws of logic and nature, not its prisoner. God made all this up. God created the concept of a rock. God created the concept of weight. God created the concept of 2 + 2 = 4. So to us, can you even imagine 2 + 2 equaling 5? Could you even imagine that? You can't imagine that. What do you mean? 2 + 2 = 4. But God could change that, which means logic itself was created by God. Laws of nature are created by God. You tell me who's right, who's wrong. Are the philosophers right, or are the mystics right? We have a dispute. Rabbis are arguing. What do you do when the rabbis argue?
Find a compromise.
There's not much of a compromise here. Well, let's put it this way. Which answer do you like better? You like Maimonides or Rabbi Shlomo ben Aderet? Philosophy or mysticism? What makes more sense to you? Anybody on Zoom? You can unmute. Let me know.
I like mysticism better.
You like mysticism better.
Right.
Okay. The real truth is I'm a little bit biased. I was giving mysticism a little bit more I was giving them a little bit more weight in my presentation. The real answer is they're both right. They're both right. Just depends what perspective you're looking at. And it's going to take us into an even deeper understanding about God and his relationship with us. They're both correct. So let me explain to you this concept. They're both right. So let me first back up and tell you a little bit about God. All right. So God is infinite. God has no limitations, no definitions. God is not bound by anything. Any law of nature or any law of logic that we are bound by, God is the creator of that. God made that up. And we have to look at it as there's God in his absolute infinite self. Beyond any limitation, beyond any experience, beyond any definition. But then God decided he wants to create a world. And God is not just the creator of the world, like the way you'll make a Disney movie in a detached way, that you just sit behind the computer screen and make up a world that exists somewhere else. But God didn't just create the world, he's invested within the world. And not just he's invested within the world, he's constantly giving his energy into the world. He's present within the world. And not only is present within the world itself is really an expression of God, is a manifestation of God. Yeah, this table over here is God. It's not God himself, but it's an expression of God. Everything is God. But God, in order to create the world, there's no world, there's no anything as we've just experienced by ourselves, right? There is nothing. There can only be a something within the realm of finitude, of limitations, of a structure. So we live in the environment of a structure. There's space, there's time, there's weight, there's everything. We live in a very structured reality. There are laws of nature, there's laws of logic. If there's no rules of anything, it's total chaos, then there's nothing. What is there? So God created a space where all of a sudden it's not infinite anymore, it's finitude, finite. And God created a world there. Our world, the spiritual world, it's all within this space where God already created a finite environment. And God then invested himself within that space. And God's the creator of the world from within that space.
So doesn't God get off easy then, because he put himself into this finite space? So now he has excuses and reasons and stuff to say, well, yeah, 2 and 2 can.
These are the rules.
Yeah.
No, so this is the way it works. So there's basically, this is the sophisticated understanding of God. God exists on 2 levels at once. And it's not a contradiction. There's God the way he is creator and creating and managing our world. Within that context, God invests himself and, so to speak, limits himself by the rules of reality, by the rules of logic, the rules of science, the rules of nature. 2 + 2 = 4 from that perspective. But just because God invests himself within this environment doesn't mean that God is limited by that. There's also God the way he is himself, his infinite self. What's an example of that? We all have that. There's who we are, just myself, my pure self. And then there's kind of the environment that I'll place myself within, which will even dictate who I am within that environment. So for example, there's who I am as a friend when I go out with my friends, when I socialize. There's who I am as a professional when I go to work. There's even who I am when I just go shopping. It's a little bit of a different vibe. And then there's who I am when I get home and take off my shoes, kick back, sit down on the couch and no one's watching. It's just me and myself, uninhibited, just me. You could invest yourself within a certain environment, and then there's who you are for yourself. Like I once saw a poem, I think it's quite a famous poem that describes the experience of a preschool girl bumping into her preschool teacher for the first time in the supermarket. And the shock of seeing her teacher outside of the classroom. And you kind of see it, that little kids get like such a thrill and such a fascination whenever they see their teacher outside of the classroom. And why is that? The answer is because their entire frame of reference for this other individual is that you are a preschool teacher. And from the kid's mind, that's who you are. All you are is a preschool teacher. You probably sleep in the closet, right? Yes, Doug and Julie. Yes.
I taught preschool for 29 years and would run into somebody in Costco, and the little one would just look at me like, what are you doing here?
Right, in disbelief, like
You
don't
must
belong here.
You don't live here, you live at school, right?
Exactly. That's exactly it. Exactly. So you know what I'm talking about. That's exactly what it is. Now, why is that? Because for the kid, their entire frame of reference of this individual is that you're a preschool teacher. And their whole mind has to kind of take a whole retake. Like, 1 second, you also exist outside of it? you exist outside of the framework of being a preschool teacher, you're also like a regular human being. Same thing is true about God. God, there's one way of looking at God as the creator, the way God manages the world, the way God is invested within the confines and the construct of creation. That's one way to look at God. Within that context, God is limited. Because there's a program here, there's a system here. God created the system, God created the program, God follows that program. There's laws of nature, there's laws of logic.
There's pretty.
Within that space, 2 + 2 only equals 4. 2 + 2 is not going to equal 5. It just doesn't make any sense. It's unthinkable. It's not happening. But we also have to appreciate that there's God the way he is for himself, beyond being the creator. Doug, you got a question? No? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and mute you. Just don't worry about it. You're good. Feel free to unmute if you do have a question or if you want to share something. All right. So both are true at the same time. There's God the way he is beyond nature, beyond reality. There's God the way he is within reality. Philosophy is man's search for God from our perspective, from within the human sphere of reality, using our mind. When we, using our own tools, try to explore God, all we see is the God in the classroom, is God as the creator, God the way he is invested within creation. From that perspective, God is limited. God is working within the confines of nature. Mysticism is bringing us the bigger picture, the bigger context. Mysticism says no. That's true, but there's also God the way he is for himself. The infinite God, not the way God, so to speak, forces himself to be within a finite environment and follow the laws of that finite environment. So let's read that in text 3, and then I have a beautiful video to show you. Now, this is a very deep concept over here. I'm not gonna make it as if this is simple stuff. But this is one of the most important premises of understanding Jewish mysticism. Understanding, having a sophisticated understanding of God. There's God as the creator, there's the way God transcends creation, within creation, beyond creation. And they're both right? The philosophers and the mystics are both right. Let's read text 3, which is from the Rebbe, page 144.
All the rules of logic were created by God. It follows that he who created these rules is not constrained by them, God forbid. As Rabbi Shlomo ben Aderet wrote in his known responsa, it is impossible for anything to be impossible for God. When certain Jewish philosophers claimed that some impossibilities are impossible even for God, they were referring to God as he chooses to confine himself to the rules of logic.
There you have it. You see, there's the way God works within nature, and God then, yes, in a certain way, is stuck by those laws of nature, but that's not the whole picture of God. Then there's God for who he is for himself. Totally infinite, totally beyond any of those laws, and totally not bound by those laws. And as it's not bound by them, you can't even ask those questions about God from that perspective. God created a rock that it can't pick up. You're already missing the point the moment you go there. Does that make some sense? Or am I just confusing you? If I'm confusing you, then I know that we're for sure doing good. Confusion is the beginning of wisdom. People who don't allow themselves to be confused, it means that they are too scared to grow intellectually. It's interesting. Yes.
For me, Rabbi?
Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
All right. I can't help myself. I have to ask a question. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Don't apologize.
If we're talking about what's finite, which is what we as people know to be finite, since God created the world in the first 7 days, has he created anything since then?
Ooh. That's a deep question. Has God, you're saying, explain to me a little bit more. I want to make sure I understand what exactly is the question.
Since we're talking about things being finite to us, although they're not finite to God, but if he truly created and then 7 days was the end of it, stopped creating, we're seeing everything that's finite, but has some of that been created since the end of the first 7 days?
Mm-hmm. So the real Jewish understanding is that God's creation of the 7 days of creation was when God was initially putting together the universe, but that creation is a continuous process, which means that God at every single moment is recreating all of nature to continue being every single moment. nature's on an autopilot, but that's another class for itself.
Of course, yeah.
But talking about getting people confusing, that's another pretty confusing statement.
Yeah,
But yeah, the
thank you.
Jewish understanding is that creation was not a historical event, it's an ongoing event. The 7 days of creation was only when God originally started it and put it together and created everything from initially. But that one act of creation is still an ongoing event, and God still has to, at every moment, continue to create everything within reality. Okay, but more on that later, yes.
Be similar then to, for instance, the creation of life, actually, like, you know, babies or animals or anything. I mean, the spark of God is within all of us. And isn't that an example of continuous creation in the finite world, just having
Just having a baby?
Yes, just having.
Not really. I'll tell you what the best analogy. I'll tell you what the
Okay.
best analogy of continuous creation is. You know, let's not go into it now.
Okay.
It's a full class for itself. It's a good class. We've done that. We'll do it again. But okay, here's a video for you. You know, actually, one more slide first. We're gonna say both are correct. Right? The mystics and the philosophers, they're both right. Just depends which perspective you're looking at the matter from. God is inherently unconstrained. There is nothing you can't say God can't do. God could do anything. And I've never watched the full movie, but there's a great clip from the movie. Frisco Kid. You never saw it? Okay. I've never seen it. Frisco Kid.
Great movie for you to see, nothing really.
I know. And you're not the first one to tell me that. I'll watch it. I'm gonna watch it, even though I usually, on principle, I don't watch movies, but I'll watch that. So there's a scene over there where the Indian tribe chief, asks the rabbi, "Can your God make rain?" And the rabbi says, "Yes, of course he can make rain. So why doesn't he?" So what does the Jew say? It's a funny argument. I don't know how philosophically true it is, but he says, because it's not his department. So he says, I don't understand. So God can't make rain? No, he could make rain, but it's just not his department. And then all of a sudden in the movie, it starts raining, and the rabbi says, "Oh, and just like that, he could also change his mind." So what's the idea? Well, God, to say that God can't do anything, it's a ridiculous statement to say from the perspective of Judaism, but he constrains himself within nature. He creates the environment, the limited environment, the finite environment of nature, and he invests himself within there.
Except for miracles.
Oh, we'll get to there soon. But even a miracle, what does that mean? That's where God comes in and says, you know, what the heck with the rules. But the fact that God could even do that is only because, and by the way, in animation, they also very often will cheat the rules because you could do whatever you want. So you want it to follow logically, or else people can't even process. You know, there has to be a certain sense of realism to it. You can also make things up. Okay, here we got a video. This is a wonderful video, but it's also a video that's going to. It's a good video, but it introduces us to. It may complicate you even more. It's the first out of. So far, they've made 5 of these animation explainer videos of teachings of Hasidus and Kabbalah. All right, and I felt that it explains very well and accurately this principle that we're talking about. There's God for himself, and there's God the way he enters within the limited environment of nature. So, here we go.
Before the beginning, there was just God. Beyond time, beyond space, with no beginning and no end. He had everything except who to share it with. So God decides to make space for something else. He has to contract his endless light within itself and create a vacuum where otherness can exist. This process of contraction is called Tzimtzum. He then allows his infinite light to re-enter the void in a controlled form and repeats this process many times, getting progressively less potent. The goal of this process is to come to a point where God's presence isn't overwhelming, where God can re-enter the void as something else, where God can re-enter as us. The purpose of this process is for God to have a relationship with us here in this world. This series is based on the Tanya written by the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Schneur Zalman. He teaches that God is one, meaning that there is really nothing else here except God. All the galaxies, planets, animals, and plants are all different forms of godly energy. How does that work? God creates reality by radiating energy, but his energy is beyond too big to be contained by physical matter. So in order for God to create physicality, he first needs to condense his energy down into a more containable form. Imagine electricity. You have a turbine under Niagara Falls harnessing tons of water and turning it into electrical energy. But the voltage is too high, so when the electricity comes into your city, it first needs to go through a transformer to lower the voltage so that it doesn't blow out the power lines. This process gets repeated once the power comes to your neighborhood, again on your street, and once more in your home on the electrical panel. Now it's safe to charge your phone. Try charging your phone directly under Niagara Falls. Not such a great idea. We need power to go through transformers to be lowered for it to be safely used. The same thing applies with God's energy. It is infinitely too powerful at the source to be safely contained by physical creatures. God first needs to transform his power down through the process of tzimtzum, a contraction of energy, so to speak. And not once, but many times, just like we saw by the power grid. So how does God transform his energy down to where it can be safely used? Stay tuned to find out on the next videos. If you'd like to take a deeper dive, make sure to visit TorahVisuals.com for more exciting content and media. Thanks.
Welcome. Torah Visuals. They don't do it anymore. They ran out of funding, but they made 5 of these videos, which were quite unbelievable. They did a very, very good job. And you always have to make this comment, I think, of like, we're speaking about very, very, very refined and subtle and abstract concepts. When you visualize it too much, you have to always remember that the visualizations are only a metaphor. It's not like it actually looks like this. It's a lot more conceptual than this. But this is the idea. God is in 2 modes at once. There's God for himself, infinite self, beyond time, beyond space, beyond logic, just himself, which is totally unfathomable to us. We have no way of actually understanding God from that perspective, the same way we can't even imagine an infinite table. And then there's a way God is within nature. The way God is within nature, you could say about him that he's limited. Well, that's more by choice. He placed himself within that environment, and he plays by those rules. So, what's the answer to the question? Can God create a rock that he cannot lift? What do you say? It's confusing, huh? The real truth is that the way God is within nature, he can't. The way God is beyond nature, the whole question doesn't even begin. The whole premise is flawed. He could, he can't. What are you even talking about? It's beyond, it's not even a question worth entertaining. It's just, okay. But there's one example within creation where you kind of saw these 2 forces at play at once. The way God is within nature and the way God is beyond nature. There was a time where you saw that. And where it was in the times of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. In the most holiest spot in the entire world, the Holy Temple. And the holiest place within the Holy Temple was the Holy of Holies. And within the Holy of Holies is the Holy Ark, the Ark of the Covenant. Which, thanks to Indiana Jones, everybody knows about, right? I don't know how accurate their depiction of it is. I don't know. I can't comment on that, but at least everybody knows about the concept, the Ark of the Covenant. Okay. And that space, the Holy of Holies, was literally the holiest space on earth. And it was a place where, heaven kisses earth, as they say. It was the end space of the finite universe and the relationship to the infinite God. That space. And you saw this certain if you could maybe call it a power struggle, or this dynamics of, on the one hand, this is a finite environment, on the other hand, this is already beyond the rules. Where did you see that? Take a look in your books on page 145. I'm going to put that up over here as well, over here in the book. This is what the Holy of Holies looked like. If you open up the Bible, book of Exodus, it tells you how the temple was built, how the tabernacle was built. The Holy of Holies was 20 cubits by 20 cubits, perfectly square room. Now, a cubit is basically 1.5 feet, approximately. Right? A cubit is a biblical measurement. So I guess 30 feet by 30 feet, roughly, square root. The ark is 2.5 cubits long by 1.5 cubits wide. Not that big. A box, 2.5 cubits long. Which means that the ark had a measurement. It was a physical box. It was made out of wood and gold. You know, it was an object in our universe. Okay. But our sages tell us that if you would take out your measuring stick, stuff wouldn't add up in this room. Okay. If you would measure the ark, it would measure 2.5 cubits. If you would then go on, starting from the left wall, and measure till the edge of the ark, you would get 10 cubits. You would go to the other side and measure from the right wall to the edge, 10 cubits. Measure the ark again, it's 2.5 cubits. Which means, the way our sages tell us, is that the ark had dimensions and was beyond dimensions. It took up space and did not take up space, both at once. That we saw over there how a little bit of an example of where God is within reality, and even within finite reality, there's a sense of something being unbelievably holy, but also that it's also beyond playing the rules. Now, we can't even imagine what that means. It does take up space, and it also doesn't take up space at the same time. If it was only one, if it just didn't take up any space at all, okay, that's one thing. My imagination doesn't need to take up any space. I can deal with things that don't take up any space, but to say that it does take up space and doesn't at the very same time, that's the unthinkable. And you that's what you saw there. This is a little bit of an example where you saw this this thing. Okay, how are we doing with time? We are like 45 minutes into the class, so tonight's going to be a really long night. You guys have any plans for tomorrow? No. Listen, we'll do whatever we can for tonight. At 9 o'clock, we'll stop.
I have 8:25.
Yeah, 8:25.
Yeah.
Oh, so we're more than 45 minutes. We're really doing bad.
Or maybe we're doing good.
Maybe we're doing good. Maybe we're doing good. Okay. Right, so the ark occupied space. It had precise dimensions. At the same time, it did not occupy space. That's the paradox. That's how it works. Okay. So let's conclude over here. Can God create a rock that he can't lift? So the answer is, number one, nothing is impossible ever for God. But at the same time, he chooses to confine himself to the constraints of logic that doesn't capture the full picture. So from a certain perspective, you could say God cannot create such a rock, but only within a certain environment. I'll give you a little metaphor. You ready for a little metaphor? Imagine, and when I grew up, I had a friend who had this experience. Imagine that you're a kid and you go to a school and your teacher is your own father. The teacher of the classroom is your father. I had a friend like that. For 2 years, we were taught by Rabbi Strux, the most important teacher in my childhood. Taught us for 2 years, and his son was in his class. Now, when Rabbi Strux was in the class with his son, you were never able to detect that this is a father and that this is a son. If he wasn't learning well, he would get told off the exact same way any other kid in class would get told off. If he got a bad mark, he would suffer the consequences of that bad mark.
Did he get a bad mark?
He was pretty good. He was a pretty good kid, but he was a kid. He knows how to make trouble, and he knew how to even make trouble in his father's classroom. And what happens in the class? We get a bad mark. The teacher will give it to him. The teacher will say, "I want to speak to you during recess." The teacher will say, "This is totally unacceptable. There's no excuse for not studying properly. You're gonna have to take a retest." Then what happened when this kid goes home? 15 minutes later, Exact same kid, exact same father. But now it's just a little bit of a different environment. Now he says, hey, you got a bad mark, don't worry about it. No big deal. Not no big deal, but you know what I'm saying? There's a whole different, it's a whole different mode. In one environment, he was interacting with his father, but the way his father is within a certain environment and limited by those rules, playing by those rules. And a father-son relationship is so much deeper. You know, in a certain sense, you could say it's more infinite, so much more real, so much more deep, so much more on an essential level. Same thing is true. We have a relationship with God that exists on two different spheres. We relate to God from one perspective within the environment of nature. We also relate to God totally beyond nature in a way that transcends nature. It's a key idea of Judaism. Okay. That's for that. How are we doing? Any questions? Let's move on. Are you getting a headache yet? Question number 2 for tonight. Does God's foreknowledge preclude our free choice? Choices. Let's talk a little bit about this. A pillar of Judaism. One of the absolute principles of Jewish belief is that every man, not man as in man, every man as in mankind, every human has free choice. You have to believe in free choice. You know, there's a certain school of thought in philosophy, not Jewish philosophy, I mean in philosophy, that nobody has any real choice. All your decisions are predetermined or are deterministic, which means technically speaking, even though you think you're making choices, it's just your illusion that you think that you are making a choice, but really between your nature, nurture, temperament, environment, it's actually totally predictable. And in that sense, according to this school of philosophy, technically speaking, theoretically, we could build a strong enough computer, and if we could plug in all of your data into a computer, this computer is going to accurately, 100%, be able to guess every single decision you will ever make in life. Because we know who you are. We know your genetics, we know your temperament, we know everything about you. That's one school of thought. Judaism absolutely says that's not true. Every human being has real choices that they could make in life. Nothing is forced upon them. Now, what do we mean by choices? It's a very important thing to understand. When we say a free choice, we are focusing specifically and exclusively on the area of moral choices. You have a moral choice is yours. We actually don't have that many choices in life if you think about it. Do you get to choose if you like vanilla ice cream or chocolate ice cream? You don't choose that. Maybe you did. Nobody asked me what my preference should be in life. What type of human do you want to be? The vanilla type of guy or the chocolate type of guy? You're born with that. So you're born. So okay, technically you go and make a choice when you go to a store. That's not called really making a choice. You know what you want, and your want is not even something you chose to want. You just simply want vanilla ice cream, so you get vanilla ice cream. But when it comes to moral choices, the choices that we can make, which are really based upon our morality and our ethics, will we make a good choice or a bad choice? That is absolutely something that God relinquished control over and says, this is all yours. I'm not mixing in, and I'm going to create myself in a way that I cannot mix in. This is fully yours. In the words of our sages, everything is in God's hands besides your morality. Your morality is really the only space where you really have your own choice. And that choice is very, very, very real. And Judaism speaks about this. Maimonides speaks about this. He bangs on the table, screams from the rooftops. You have 100% free choice. Nothing is forcing you to do anything. Whatever choice you will ever make in life are fully yours. If you make good choices, you can take full credit for them. If you make bad choices, you have nobody else to blame. That's what Maimonides says. It's a very beautiful concept. It's a very empowering concept. And it's really in a certain way, Maimonides says this is the premise of Judaism. The premise of any sense of the premise of morality, the premise of any religion is the idea that we can make choices and that we have control over our choices. At the same time, there's another key principle of Judaism, another pillar of Judaism. Another principle of Judaism is that God knows everything, and God knows everything that will be. Which means God already knows every single choice you will make. And if you think about it, those two statements don't seem to be too compatible. If I have absolute free choice, that should mean that God doesn't know what I'm going to be doing. God doesn't know what I'm going to do. Why couldn't I do it yet? And I have full choice to decide what I'm going to do. But if God knows about it, then that means I don't have free choice. That means it's already been determined. It's already a fact. There's nothing I can do to change that. So here we have another paradox and a conundrum that people have struggled with throughout the ages. Free choice versus God's knowledge, God's foreknowledge. So here we go. Free choice is a pillar of Judaism. God's foreknowledge is also a pillar of Judaism. How are they compatible? That's our question here. Do we really have choices? Do we really have choices? How can these two things be correct at the same time? So here's a story. There's once an American Jew, first time going to visit Israel. He's very excited, but has no clue what's waiting for him. He's on his El Al flight. He bought himself a business ticket. He's doing this right. Business class ticket. And it's time for his first meal on his way to Israel. And the stewardess comes over, an Israeli woman, and says, "Sir, would you like breakfast?" So he says, "Sure, what are my choices?" So she says, "Yes or no?" That's it, very simple. What choices? Yes or no? Okay. So okay, all right, that's the question. Do we really have choices in life? Now, what's the answer? I'm going to give you an answer. And according to many hundreds and thousands of years of Jewish study, this is an accepted answer, which is considered the easiest answer. This is the easiest answer, but it's not the best answer. I'm going to tell you the easiest answer, but it's not the best answer. So first, let's just talk about the answer, and then we'll see why we don't like it. Here's the answer. It's a very simple idea. You ready? Okay. What's the answer? Okay. I'm looking right now at all of you. Look at you here in person. I'm looking at those of you here on Zoom, if you have your video on. If you don't have your video on, I can't look at you. FYI. But if you have your video on, I can look at you, which is beautiful. There's something so beautiful about looking at people. There you go. Doug Schiffman, what a beautiful face. What a beautiful mensch. Look at that. See, this is what makes my night. I get to see you guys. Okay. When I look at you, I'm also seeing what you're doing. So I see that you got dressed in this today, and I see that you just ate. Was it good?
It was delicious.
It was delicious. Very good. So you just ate a pudding, and I saw you eating it. So now I know that you just ate it. So you made a choice to eat it, and now I saw you doing it. So now I know that you did it. Does my knowledge affect your choice? No. How do I know that you did it? Because you did it. Which means what came first? My knowledge or your choice? Your choice. You made the choice to take one. You made the choice to eat it. See, Jeff didn't eat it. He just took it. Didn't eat it. That was his choice. Frida took it and ate it. Now we know that she ate it. Okay, so I could know something, but that didn't compel your choice. It didn't affect your choice, right? This answer basically says is, you know how God knows everything? Because he witnessed you do it. His knowledge didn't force you to do it. The opposite. Your choice gave him his knowledge. The only catch is that God is not bound by time. It's the same way I see you doing something in real time, and then I get to know that you just did that. God is beyond time. So for you, tomorrow didn't happen yet. But for God, he's already witnessed what you've done tomorrow. Yeah, this starts giving you a little bit of a headache. It's a brain twister, but that's what it is. God is beyond time. We are limited, so we are slowly moving through the continuum of time. We didn't arrive at tomorrow yet, but for God, 500 years from now, 5,000 years ago, it's all the present. So God knows everything. God knows what's going to happen in the future. You know why God knows what's going to happen in the future? Because we've made that choice. I know we didn't make it yet, but God knows what we're going to do only after we made the choice, even though we didn't make it there yet, but God, okay, you see, it baffles the mind. It's a very hard concept to understand that God is not bound by something that is so real to us and such a real limitation like time. But this is the simple answer. The same way I look at you and I see what you do, and therefore I know what you've done, same thing happens to God. The only caveat is that God is not bound by time. But the same rule applies. God is simply, or put it this way, imagine you have a time machine. Elon Musk, I'm saying he's got to have time machine on his agenda, no? Time travel's got to be something Elon is going to go after. Okay, so imagine Elon Musk gets a time machine and he travels into the future. He sees what's going to happen. And then he comes back and tells us what's going to happen. How does he know what happened? It didn't happen yet, but yet he went there. He witnessed it. And then he comes back and tells us what's going to happen. So he has foreknowledge, although it didn't happen yet. But he only knows about it because he witnessed what happened. That's basically the way to think about it by God. Do we have free choice? Absolutely. Don't ever think you don't have free choice. How's God's knowledge? Because he witnessed you doing it. That is this answer. And this is the simplest and easiest way to get out of this problem. Do you like the answer? You don't? Okay, so let's first read, then we'll talk about it. Okay. Does anyone else not like this answer?
I don't think I'm happy with it either.
You're not happy with it.
Something's bugging me about it.
Something's bugging you about it? Okay, so let's read and then we'll talk about what's bugging you. Okay, text 5. Where are we holding? Pam, would you like to read?
Sure.
Text 5, page 147.
Here's an analogy that will clarify the matter. Suppose I see Reuben running. While he is certainly running, his running isn't compelled by my knowledge and observation of his running. Although my knowledge is absolute, his running is by choice. The same applies to divine knowledge. God's foreknowledge of our choices doesn't compel our choices because God transcends time and our future is his present. Just as our knowledge of current events doesn't compel those events, so does his knowledge of our future choices not compel our choices.
You hear that, right? God simply knows it because we chose to do it. That's how he knows it. See, he's not guessing. See, some people want to give it, I'll give you an even more primitive answer, which is really not a good answer. Some people say it's not that God knows what you're going to do, it's that God knows you so well that he can predict what you're going to do. He can predict it with such certainty. That's not a good answer. That's really, because that's called knowledge. That's called good guessing. That's called great guessing. That's not called knowledge. Like I could say, I know my wife so well, I know exactly what she's going to do in this situation. Doesn't mean that I know what she's going to do. It means I can make a very, very good educated guess. I don't know. It's not called knowledge. It's not called certainty. This answer is something a little bit more advanced than that. No, God absolutely knows. You know what? Because he witnessed it. See, even though you've not gone there yet, right? That's where it gets a little bit confusing. This is a good answer because it's an easy answer. But it's lacking sophistication and it doesn't hold much water if you really want to be real about the issue. But we're not going to get into that. But you tell me, so why didn't you like the answer, Jeff?
It seems to me, not so much that I don't like it, as I think the better answer is God knows, you use the example of knowing your wife. Presumably, God knows us better than we know one another. And if God knows us well enough, he should be able to predict that.
Oh, but that's a prediction. That's not knowledge. That's an even weaker answer because knowledge means knowledge. It means God knows. God knows. What do you say, Frida? Why?
I'm not sure. I have to think this out a little bit more.
That's a smart thing to say, by the way.
There's something,
Something's a bit iffy.
yeah, it is definitely iffy for me, but there's something I'm not, it's not straight in my head. And if I'm not straight in my head, I can't really articulate it.
Right,
and I
right.
don't know.
It doesn't
Yeah.
settle, but you can't be not sure yet how to describe why not.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. Many times I have that too. something just doesn't settle well with me, and I can't even explain why not. But no, but
Are
that,
we gonna? All right,
it's a good instinct. Okay, I'll just tell you like this.
okay.
Maimonides, which people inaccurately describe as a rationalist. He actually wasn't. He understood the art of rationalism, but he wasn't a rationalist. He screams from the rooftops, literally, that there's no answer to this question. Stop trying to rationalize this conundrum. He absolutely doesn't accept any answers. Why not? He says, whatever answer you're ever going to conceive of either limits the power of your knowledge, the power of your choice, or the power of God's knowledge. Even this answer, oh, God doesn't really know. He only knows after you've done it. That's a weak knowing. That's a weak knowing. My mind says I'm not happy with that. God absolutely knows the future, everything, even before you made the choice. And you have absolute free choice, and God does not determine any choice that you make. But God knows everything is the thing absolutely. Makes no sense. My mind says, good. Leave it as a question. There's a reason why you're not God. That's what my mind says. Absolute foreknowledge, and you have absolute free choice, and it doesn't indeed make any sense. It's a paradox that we do not have any tools of logic to understand. And Maimonides, who usually people say is a big rationalist, refuses here. He argues with his contemporaries to say, stop rationalizing yourself out of the issue. You're messing it up. Keep it a mystery. That's what Maimonides says.
Didn't Spinoza though try to rationalize this?
Spinoza, well, you want.
That's part of this class, though. I should have said that. Never mind.
Yeah, Spinoza definitely took a lot of the questions that we're dealing with in our course and did his thing on that.
Under his-
But this is definitely not a Spinoza class. Okay.
No, I know that.
Okay. Okay, does God's foreknowledge preclude our free choice? The answer is, at least the answer that we gave here, is that God's foreknowledge isn't the cause of our choice. The opposite, God's knowledge is the outcome of our choice. Therefore, he knows, and we have free choice, and everything's good. But I had to mess it up. I had to tell you it's a bad answer. But it's an accepted answer as the easy answer. And that's okay. That's okay. Not always, we can accept easy answers, even if they're a little bit flawed, but it's okay. Okay, we have 18 minutes left. So I'm going to skip question number 3, especially because I think a lot of the premises of the question were already answered in our first question. The next question's title is there anything that God finds difficult to do? What do you think the answer is? Yeah.
Punish people. Like,
What?
just like punish people for their sins, or like see that somebody just isn't doing well and kind of, we hate to use the word punish for their sins, but like somebody's sinning, I don't know.
No, but I'm not talking about punishing. I'm talking about, is there anything that God finds difficult to do? Anything? Are you connecting that with punishment, or you're saying punishment is difficult?
Yeah, that he finds it difficult to see one of his people not do well, and maybe.
That's difficult. No, I'm saying, like, is there any act of God which is like difficult? Okay, well, but we don't have the time, and I wanna end this class on a timely manner, so we're just going to move right along. And if you want, of course, you could read the text on your own. If you guys really, really want, we could do an encore class, but you'll have to let me know if you really, really, really want that. Okay. Question number 4 for tonight is, if God has decided to do something, can we change his mind? What do you think? Do you think we could change God's mind?
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. No, okay, so we're getting a lot of yeses. Why do you say yes?
Well, it was proven even at the time of with Sodom and Gomorrah, when Abraham was arguing with God.
Right. Jewish tradition, starting from Abraham until today, we are very into trying to change God's mind. There's a problem, let's pray to God, let's try to
But he did
do something.
He did change his mind.
Right, or God definitely did engage with Abraham, saying, maybe I'll change my mind. In Sodom and Gomorrah, he didn't. We even find regret in the Torah. That God, right, the great flood, God says, I regret. Leah, and what's your thought?
Well, sometimes we can, and sometimes the answer is no. You
Right, so you're
know,
saying God does change his mind. Let's think about it a little bit. Why do we change our minds sometimes? The idea that we could change our minds really is a flaw. It's a flaw. Which means because we are imperfect people, therefore, we very often need to change our minds because we don't have all the information. Maybe we made a bad judgment call. Maybe we need to reassess something based on a new development. So we need to change our minds because we're flawed. It's an imperfection. If God is perfect, God knows the future. God knows everything. There's nothing God doesn't know. Seemingly, it doesn't make sense that God should ever need to change his mind. He gets it right away. He's perfection. There shouldn't be any reason for God to ever have to change his mind. And there's a lot of people who feel that it's somewhat blasphemous to even the whole concept of prayer. This is a big Jewish question. You're going to pray to God and say, God, I need you to change your mind. I'll explain to you why you should change your mind. Oh, really? You have information that's going to help God change his mind? Like God will be like, oh, I didn't know that. If I would have known, I would have chosen something else. Now that you tell me, let's rethink the issue. Doesn't make any sense. If you think about it, God's opinion and God's mind should never be changed. God makes perfect decisions and never thinks back or looks back and never needs to look back on any of those judgment calls, seemingly. But at the same time, and this is where we have the paradox, right? This class was titled his paradoxes. So everything needs to be a paradox. Judaism seems to be all about trying to change God's mind. Yeah, let's pray. Prayer, we're always telling God, I understand that this is what you gave me, but I want to pray for this. We want to try to affect God's change. I want to, give me blessings. We don't just say, God did this, just accept and move on. No, pray and try to do things. This is very Jewish. And how does that work? Does that mean that God is imperfect? How does that fit changing God's mind with God's perfection? So yes.
We say on the Matzah that God should act toward us like a father toward his son, meaning in a merciful way. So the prayer may not just be, here are some facts you didn't consider, God, but God, you know all the facts, but could you please put some of the facts aside and do for me just out of love?
Right. So you're saying we will ask God to not change his mind, and not because he made it bad, but even then, God is perfect. Every single choice God makes is perfect. What does that mean that there could be a more perfect option in this scenario? Sometimes what God decides for us, to us, is painful. Maybe from God's perspective, this is actually the perfect decision. This is what God decided you need, and this is good for you, and this is good for everything. And you're going to come and say, no, God, I want you to change your mind. Why? Because I said so. And God should take that seriously. But it's Jewish. The fact is, that's a Jewish way of doing things. So I want to go back and I want to conclude, because this is actually where Jewish philosophy becomes a very personal concept. We opened up this class, we got into the whole concept that God exists on two different levels simultaneously, and that our relationship with God also exists on two different levels. Generally speaking, God's relationship with the world and God's relationship with us is the way God is within nature, where God himself follows the laws of nature, where God himself follows the laws of logic, where there's a system in place and the system is always followed. From within the system, God makes certain choices. For example, God is going to make the choice that tomorrow morning, I don't know at what time, the sun's going to rise. And God is going to choose tomorrow at 5:00 p.m. exactly, because that's what time it was today, the sun is going to set. You know why God makes that choice? Because that's what the system says it should happen. There's laws, there's rules, right? There's a finite universe, and God follows those rules. God follows those laws. And things happen in our universe following the system. And generally speaking, things that happen to us and things that happen in the universe are dictated by God, are decided by God from within the framework of the system. But then there's also a certain relationship that every Jew has with God. Because we don't only have a business relationship with God, we have a very personal relationship with God. Where every single Jew has a relationship with God which transcends the system. From that perspective, the system doesn't matter. And God, in a split second, could say, the heck with the system. When we turn to God in prayer, and when we do a mitzvah, we're very often trying to connect with God on a deeper level, beyond the way God is in his creator costume. I'm creating the world. What's the system? What are the rules of the game? And we're trying to speak to God the way God is, beyond nature, beyond the system, beyond the rules. And from that perspective, very often, God is actually going to say, let's rig the system. Let's cheat the system. Let's do something that makes no sense. Let's do a miracle. This is where miracles come from. It transcends nature. It's the power of God outside of the system, coming in and messing around with the system. And there's big miracles and small miracles. The way the world works is, and this is what God tells us in the Torah, generally speaking, nature is nature. Rules are rules. God's relationship with us and the way God decides what should happen is within the laws of nature. And God says, you know what? I'm going to give you the tools through your initiative that you could interact with me on a deeper level. And that from that deeper level, I'll also operate with you on that deeper level. And God says the keys are in your hands. And this is a very big part of really the mysticism of prayer, is to reach out to God and have a relationship with God, which is beyond nature. The essential connection with God. And from that perspective, it's not so much that God is changing his mind. It's just that the confines of nature, the confines of the decision-making that God binds himself to regularly are totally off the table from this perspective. And from this perspective, miracles are just as easy as nature. God has no problem rigging the system. It's a very powerful concept that we have the power to have a relationship with God on a deeper level. And to conclude with one final thought. This is what our sages teach us. How do we initiate a relationship with God where God interacts with us beyond nature? How do we do that? You know what the answer is? By us going outside of our nature. If we show God, you know what, I'm going to connect with you beyond what I like doing, beyond what's comfortable for me. I'm just going to interact. I'm going to connect with you as a Jew with a certain level of commitment, which is beyond nature, beyond my nature. Then God says, okay, if that's the premise of the relationship, I'm in as well. This is also where we have the concept of teshuvah. In Hebrew, teshuvah, in English, we very often translate the word teshuvah as repentance. That's not what teshuvah means. It doesn't mean repentance, like to be a penitent from a mistake. Teshuvah simply means the art of connecting with God. Even a righteous person could do teshuvah. Get closer to God. The whole idea that God is willing to forgive somebody and say, you know what, the mistake that you did yesterday, I'll make as if it never happened. I'll just erase it from your record. That is an act where God is rigging the system. God is saying your actions should have consequences, and I'm just going to make as if it never happened and as if there should be no consequences. You know why? Because this is not a business relationship. This is a father and son relationship. This is a father and daughter relationship. I'm not bound, and we're not bound by the relationship with God simply the way God is within nature. We have easy access to God beyond nature, which is a very powerful concept. So does God change his mind? Not necessarily. The question is if just we could. There's the way God makes choices from within a certain framework, and we have the power to also go beyond that framework. And that's where miracles come from. And there are miracles that happen to us all the time, and we are capable of producing even more miracles. A miracle simply means that God is willing to say, you know what? The system says this, but the heck with the system. I'll do it the way I want to do it. And with that, dear friends, we're going to conclude tonight's class. And next week is our final lesson. Our final lesson titled, Our Relationship with God, a final few very meaningful and powerful questions. And as I started this class with, this is our upcoming course, Book Smart, which will absolutely change the way you ever understand Judaism and the way you will ever study. This is the context to everything. Very powerful and very beautiful course. You'll be hearing a lot more about it, God willing, if you're on my mailing list and if you're on my phone list, God willing. And I want to thank you all for joining for tonight's lesson. We have only one more to go, 5 down, 1 more to go. And I want to bless you all. God bless you all and have a wonderful evening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Rabbi. Great lesson.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.